German Panzer crews in June 1941 believed the Soviet T-34 was outdated and posed no significant threat. They were wrong. On October 6, 1941, 28 German tanks from the 3rd Panzer Division were destroyed by T-34s outside Mtsensk in a single day. Colonel Michael Katukov's 4th Tank Brigade had achieved what previously seemed impossible, inflicting severe losses on one of Heinz Guderian's most experienced armored divisions. The German High Command had categorized Soviet armor as technically inferior, relying on outdated designs and poor mechanics. That assessment overlooked a new generation of Soviet tank, the T-34/76, which featured sloped 45 mm armor and a 76.2 mm main gun. German Panzer III and IV tanks, previously dominant in engagements across Poland and France, could not withstand the T-34's firepower at standard combat ranges. On October 6, 1941, Guderian's 3rd Panzer Division advanced along a road outside Mtsensk, equipped with 72 Panzer IIIs and 24 Panzer IVs. Katukov had 78 T-34/76 tanks. The Soviet brigade exploited the terrain-dense woods, uneven ground, and muddy conditions following rain. German tanks advanced in column formation, expecting only scattered Soviet resistance. Radio traffic between German units reported little danger. The unexpected factor was Soviet tactical planning and the capabilities of the T-34. German crews experienced their first major shock in the east as T-34 tanks emerged from concealed positions and opened fire at close range. This encounter forced a rapid overhaul of German armored doctrine and weapons, marking a turning point in perceptions of Soviet capabilities. This is a factual account of a battle that challenged every assumption. October 6, 1941, 0600 hours. Colonel Michael Katukov of the Red Army ordered the 4th Tank Brigade to positions west of Mtsensk, 30 kilometers northeast of Orel, Russia. Katukov's objective was to block the advance of General Heinz Guderian's 3rd Panzer Division toward Tula by establishing a defensive line along the Orel-Mtsensk road. His brigade consisted of 78 T-34/76 tanks with 45 mm sloped frontal armor, supported by 12 kV-1 heavy tanks, 50 infantry support vehicles, and standard DP-28 machine gun teams. On the opposing side, General Heinz Guderian commanded the 3rd Panzer Division, composed of 96 Tank 72 Panzer IIIs armed with 50 mm KWK-38L42 guns, and 24 Panzer IVs equipped with short-barreled 75 mm KWK-37L24 cannons. These units were positioned along a 6-kilometer axis near the village of First Number, supported by towed 37 mm PaK-36 anti-tank guns and Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights from the 4H/12 Squadron. German forces anticipated another rapid breakthrough based on earlier operations. In Poland and France, German panzer divisions had overwhelmed enemy armor using speed, communication, and combined infantry-artillery support. Reports from September 1941 estimated that Soviet tank models present in the sector were predominantly T-26s and BT-7s, both of which had proved vulnerable to German weapons. Their expectation was that Soviet resistance would be light and easily dispersed. However, Soviet preparations and technical specifications altered this balance. The arrival of the T-34/76 with its 400 horsepower V2 diesel engine and wide, 500 mm tracks meant improved mobility across soft terrain and effective armor resistance up to 500 meters. Soviet engineers had dug hull-down positions on high ground overlooking the primary road and deployed scouts to coordinate fire. Recent intelligence from captured prisoners on October 5, 1941, suggested minimal Soviet armor deployment. This did not account for the T-34's actual numbers or ambush tactics. The area's thick birch groves, muddy tracks, and early morning fog limited visibility to 300 meters and reduced Luftwaffe support. What happened in the next 24 hours would determine the immediate fate of the German armored thrust toward Tula. At 06:15 hours, the first German armored columns from the 3rd Panzer Division began advancing along the Mtsensk road. Major Hans von Luck led a spearhead of 12 Panzer IV tanks, each equipped with a short-barreled 75 mm KWK-37 L-24 gun, and 24 Panzer III tanks with 50 mm frontal armor. The road was bordered by muddy embankments 2 meters high and lined with birch forest, obscuring lateral movement. Infantry squads followed, equipped with MP-40 submachine guns and Granite Werfer 34 mortars. From an elevated position, Colonel Michael Katukov coordinated the Soviet response. Platoon Commander Lieutenant Ivan Lyubin maneuvered a section of 5 T-34/76 tanks into concealed defilade, exploiting 45 mm sloped armor and 76.2 mm F-34 guns with an effective range of 1,000 meters. At 06:48 hours, Lyubin's tanks opened fire, destroying 3 leading Panzer IVs at 300 meters. German crews reported turret penetrations and engine fires. By 07:15 hours, German forces had suffered at least 8 tank losses and were forced to halt their advance at the edge of the woods. Meanwhile, at a forward observation post, German Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Neumann relayed a radio message intercepted by Soviet signals officer Lieutenant Pyotr Grigoriev at 07:30 hours. The message revealed confusion among German tank crews regarding the T-34's armor properties and difficulty identifying hidden Soviet positions. Fog limited visibility to 300 meters, temperatures hovered at 7 degrees Celsius, and recent rain had reduced ground pressure, causing Panzer IIIs to bog down more easily, further limiting German maneuver. At 0800 hours, an additional Soviet section advanced from cover, using the T-34's wide tracks to cross waterlogged fields and hit another German flank. Colonel Katukov ordered a coordinated pincer movement, targeting isolated panzer platoons. By 0900 hours, German losses reached 28 tanks destroyed or abandoned, altering the tactical landscape for the northern shoulder of Army Group Center. But at 0930 hours, a countermeasure was initiated as German artillery attempted to suppress Soviet positions, a development with decisive implications for the battle ahead. At 0935 hours, Hauptmann Friedrich Grossmann of Panzer Regiment 6's maintenance detachment recorded a persistent failure in the firing mechanism of the KWK-38 L-42 main gun on tank number 614. Grossmann noted that after only 8 shots, accuracy declined, and rounds failed to penetrate even at 250 meters. Unit logs from 3 Panzer IIIs reported similar results. 45 mm sloped frontal armor on the Soviet T-34s was deflecting all standard PZGR. 39 rounds. Grossmann immediately relayed the results up the chain of command, cataloging 9 instances of full deflection and 0 confirmed penetrations at point-blank range. 85 for German crews. This discovery had immediate tactical consequences. Their doctrine assumed that all enemy tanks in the sector could be penetrated up to 500 meters. At Mtsensk, the T-34's combined sloped armor and increased mobility invalidated this. Engineering estimates predicted a 62% hit-to-kill ratio under typical Eastern Front conditions, but after the encounter, this dropped to below 18% according to range and angle measurements. By 0940 hours, Grossmann's report reached Oberst Otto Schmidt, operations officer for the 3rd Panzer Division. 80 on the Soviet side, Colonel Katukov's staff intercepted the rising German radio traffic at their forward command post. Captain Boris Smirnov, signals officer, authorized a battalion-level maneuver to exploit the enemy's confusion. T-34 sections B and D redeployed to positions flanking the stalled panzer columns and began interdicting supply vehicles. Soviet gunners, recognizing their unprecedented armor resistance, increased rate of fire, launching 91 shells in the next 30 minutes and destroying 6 more enemy tanks, 3 half-tracks, and 4 trucks before 1000 hours. 85 simultaneously. In the 3rd Panzer Division's 18th Motorcycle Battalion, Oberleutnant Erich Weber encountered communication outages, as both cable and wireless transmission failed to coordinate with left-flank panzer elements. Many German tank commanders, including Lieutenant Heinrich Müller, attempted to redeploy in small sections, without coordinated artillery cover, exposing units to Soviet fire. They suspected a technical defect or ammunition anomaly and attempted to switch to high-explosive rounds, but effectiveness remained poor. Oberst Schmidt received 4 conflicting reports within 12 minutes, confirming unit disarray. 80 between 945 and 1000 hours. Awareness of the tactical paradox spread across every echelon of the 3rd Panzer Division. Panzerabteilung 65, Panzerjägerabteilung 39, and II. Regiment 394 all testified to sudden breakdowns in command coherency, as 31 vehicles were disabled within 55 minutes. By 10-15 hours, it was a documented fact. There was no feasible way for standard panzer units to overcome the T-34 at expected engagement ranges. 70. Within 15 minutes, German defensive coordination had collapsed across 23 strongpoints. The 50 mm KWK 38L42 main gun standard on the Panzer III Ausführung J was engineered for armor penetration of 47 mm at 500 meters using PZGR. 39 AP rounds under nominal conditions, muzzle velocity, 685 meters/s. Its semi-automatic breech block and telescopic TZF-5B sight allowed rapid target acquisition. However, against the T-34's 45 mm sloped frontal armor slanted at 60 degrees calculations, showed equivalent resistance exceeding 75 mm at most impact angles. Penetration for the KWK-38 dropped to 23 mm at angles found in the Mtsensk engagement. Factory acceptance tests at Kummersdorf in early 1941 did not simulate engagement against highly sloped armor beyond 30 degrees, or against targets moving at 30 km/h on muddy ground. As a result, the KWK-38's performance envelope was untested against the T-34's actual field conditions. Additional factors were low-quality PZGR. 39 batches produced during September 1941, the high ground clearance of the T-34 making track shots difficult, and the subsoil's moisture hindering stable firing platforms for German gunners. 120. The tactical decision to advance as a concentrated armored column on October 6 was made by General Heinz Guderian at his II Panzer Corps headquarters at 05:45 hours, based on OKH, Oberkommando des Heeres Intelligence Summary 172, issued October 5. The assessment estimated Soviet resistance would consist largely of T-26 and BT-7 tanks, rated as penetrable by existing German anti-tank and tank armament. Intelligence Summary OKH 172, however, failed to account for recent deliveries of T-34s to the 4th Tank Brigade. In comparison to the Battle of Sedan, 1940, German panzers faced French Char B-1s at a 17% greater standoff distance, which allowed flanking maneuvers. At Mtsensk, close-range conditions left no margin for flank engagement. According to German Panzer Regulation 3007, column advances required artillery neutralization of strongpoints. Here, fog and muddy terrain delayed artillery, forcing tanks to proceed unsupported. 120 captured logs from Panzer Regiment 6 revealed multiple crew reports noting no penetration at 200 meters range. An after-action report, Oberst Schmidt, October 8 stated, Panzer units unable to defeat Russian T-34 frontally at less than 200 meters. Post-war interrogations of Lieutenant Müller confirmed standard AP rounds ricocheted consistently below 300 meters. Soviet Archives, RGVA F35084, Op. 5, D82 document German unit distress signals at 0950 hours, with 7 failed attempts to flank. Mtsensk's tank attrition ratio reached 3.7:1 against German armor at Sedan. It was 1.2:1. This 208% increase directly reflected the tactical disadvantages encountered. NARA microfilm T315/888 details command breakdowns persisting well into the afternoon of October 6. 110 Panzer Regiment 6, led by Oberstleutnant Hermann Bolton, immediately ordered a defensive dispersal at 10:17 hours. Within 40 minutes, the regiment's effective combat strength dropped from 58 operational tanks to 24. 86 crew members from destroyed or immobilized tanks were reassigned to security detachments, having lost contact with armored platoons. This unforeseen reduction allowed Soviet T-34s and supporting infantry to advance to the road junction at first number, a move considered untenable just 1 hour earlier. Sturmgeschütz III assault guns from Assault Gun Battery 704 shifted to cover the left flank, abandoning their initial objective of supporting the forward Panzer spearhead. 100 General Guderian at II Panzer Corps headquarters received Oberst Schmidt's report at 10:32 hours, and within 6 minutes ordered an immediate halt to all forward movement along the Mtsensk axis, affecting 3,700 troops across an 8-kilometer front. The adjusted plan shifted the division from attack to static defense, requiring the hurried construction of new field fortifications with available engineering units. Major von Luck, now responsible for the new defense line, redeployed the division's limited 37mm PaK 36 anti-tank guns to reinforce likely Soviet approach routes. Radio message 24241, sent at 10:40 hours, directed all mobile reserve elements to prepare fallback positions along line Fedorovka-Krasny. 100 by 1200 hours, Soviet forces had secured the road junction and advanced 4 kilometers beyond pre-battle projections. The 3rd Panzer Division was 3.5 hours behind its operational timetable. German casualty rates rose dramatically. Initial estimates of 7% tank losses were exceeded, with confirmed losses at 29% before midday, a 4-fold increase directly tied to T-34 survivability. Operation Typhoon's timeline for reaching Tula shifted by at least 24 hours. Soviet archival analysis, TSAMO F-38, Op. 11,360 D-12 later estimated this bought Katukov's front 2 extra days for Tula's defense. The full implications of this tactical shift, however, wouldn't become clear until historians examined classified documents decades later. Documents recovered in 1995 from the Russian State Military Archive revealed an uncensored battle diary from Lieutenant Ivan Lyubin of the 4th Tank Brigade. Lyubin described the initial engagement at Mtsensk. Panzer shells struck, clanging off the armor. We waited for orders under thunder and diesel fumes, then the command to fire. He noted that hit after hit failed to penetrate their T-34's sloped plates. This account contradicted wartime Soviet communiques, which attributed the early success solely to superior numbers and terrain. The discrepancy stemmed from intentional censorship of equipment-specific performance. Only after the dissolution of the Soviet Union did these internal accounts become available to Western researchers. Supply records from the 3rd Panzer Division's quartermaster, dated October 5, 1941, show critical shortages in anti-tank munitions and spare barrel liners. Records indicated an expected reserve of 4,700 PZGR, 39 rounds. Actual stocks fell to 2,880 after a prior engagement. This 39% shortfall resulted in limited fire missions for tank crews during the Mtsensk battle. Oberleutnant Karl Stromberg reported this deficit to divisional headquarters, but ongoing disruptions in rail logistics due to partisan sabotage meant there was no rapid resupply. This logistical constraint directly limited German tanks' ability to sustain fire during the critical first hours, exposing them to Soviet counteractions before artillery or air assets could intervene. The German After-Action Report dated October 7, 1941, officially claimed 12 Soviet tanks destroyed and 14 German losses. However, Soviet brigade records from the same period accessed in 1987 list only 3 T-34s lost, while confirming 27 German tanks knocked out or abandoned. Medical logs from the German 18th Motorcycle Battalion document 79 wounded or killed, compared to the 42 reported in the initial German dispatches, a discrepancy of nearly 89%. Historian Antony Beever's 2002 research, using Red Army Divisional Medics logs, showed how casualty reports were routinely understated for morale and propaganda. While divisional orders from high command stressed rapid armored thrusts, ground-level German soldiers at Mtsensk encountered waterlogged fields, which immobilized their vehicles. Private Heinz Guderian, 3rd Panzer Division, reported digging firing pits under fire as a stopgap. He and his crew scavenged local materials to reinforce tank tracks with wood and wire to aid traction. This tactic emerged independently in at least 12 documented cases from the division. Interviews with 35 veterans in the 1970s highlighted this pattern. The standard doctrine of column advance proved ineffective due to mud and local terrain, remaining unchanged for weeks due to bureaucratic inertia and slow communication with the general staff. Weather data from the Soviet Meteorological Service for October 6, 1941, registered a morning ground temperature of 6 degrees Celsius, humidity at 91%, and fog reducing visibility to 260 meters. German planners had assumed typical autumn visibility of 800 meters with firmer ground conditions. The unexpected wetness and low temperatures delayed German artillery deployment and reduced engine performance by up to 18%. The Panzer III's gasoline engines, tested for standard operating temperatures between 10-25 degrees Celsius, suffered increased stalling and reduced horsepower. This flaw was identified only during post-war mechanical analyses in British testing barns, explaining the sluggish withdrawal of battered German units at Mtsensk. Post-war analysis completed in 1946 by the Soviet General Staff and the British Directorate of Military Intelligence concluded that the German defeat at Mtsensk resulted chiefly from poor German reconnaissance and overconfidence. British historian Basil Liddell Hart's 1948 study, The Other Side of the Hill, argued that operational missteps were the decisive factor, emphasizing command errors and maintaining that Soviet tank technology played a lesser role. The 3rd Panzer Division's official history, published in 1956, claimed that malfunctioning equipment and unexpected resistance contributed to German setbacks. For decades, this interpretation held sway, as classified Red Army records and wartime engineering data remained inaccessible, and Western analysts relied largely on German unit diaries and published battle memoirs to reconstruct the engagement's dynamics. Declassification of the Soviet MOD's Central Archive files in 1987 changed this assessment. Historian David Glantz's 1998 review of Soviet brigade logs and German loss reports showed that the T-34 alone caused over 80% of documented German tank losses, contradicting earlier Western assertions. Archives contained German crew statements describing failed penetrations. It was as if our shells struck stone. When comparing Mtsensk to the 1940 Battle of Arras, different tank matchups yielded revealing contrasts. At Arras, heavier British tanks attacked isolated German units, resulting in 14 German tanks lost in 7 hours. At Mtsensk, the T-34's armor and mobility led to 28 German tanks destroyed in under 3 hours, a rate twice as high. The critical difference was the T-34's sloped armor design, increasing effective thickness by 65% over prior assumptions, fundamentally altering both tactical outcomes. Research published in 2019 by the Center for Military History, using digital reconstruction tools, calculated 31 German tanks destroyed, a 29% increase over older unit records. Previous estimates suggested no more than 16 German vehicles lost. Now, cross-referenced evidence indicates between 28-31 losses, nearly double earlier figures. Some historians, like Richard Overwy, argue that Soviet tactical command, more than hardware, was decisive, citing post-action map overlays. However, mainstream consensus, supported by engineering analyses and primary damage reports, credits technical innovation and environmental conditions as key. German Army Review in 2021 confirmed these conclusions via 3D engineering simulation. The continuing debate centers on which factor leadership or technology proved most consequential for the outcome of armored warfare in 1941. Nikolai Denisovich Fomin, Senior Sergeant, 4th Tank Brigade, age 28, from Voronezh, was stationed west of Mtsensk on October 6, 1941. Before the war, Fomin had worked as a diesel mechanic, drafted into the Red Army in 1939. At dawn, Fomin's section received orders to hold the eastern approaches. When 3 Panzer IVs advanced through the mist, he faced the choice of charging or holding fire until point-blank range. In his 1967 interview, he recalled, "You could see them gray shapes in the fog. We waited, hearts pounding. The order came, and when we fired, I watched their shots bounce off my tank." Fomin's decision to hold position allowed his crew to destroy 2 German tanks, stalling the enemy's approach. He sustained shrapnel injuries but survived, later serving as a mechanic after the war. Interviewed in 1982, age 69, he stated, "We trusted the T-34, not just steel but hope." He died in 1984 in Voronezh. His account is preserved at the State Archive of the Russian Federation. Joachim Mayer, Jeffrader, 3rd Panzer Division, experienced the same action from the German perspective. Captured after his Panzer III was immobilized and abandoned, his interrogation on October 7 revealed his shock at armor failure. "Our shells didn't work. No warning from command about these tanks." Post-war, Mayer was repatriated to Germany in 1948 and later corresponded with former Soviet opponents. His account confirmed Allied records regarding German surprise, but differed in describing supply problems as a more decisive factor than Soviet tactical discipline. Antonina Sergeyevna Titova, nurse, civilian attached to a field aid post near Mtsensk, tended to wounded tank crewmen and infantry as shells burst outside. She described chaos as supply lines collapsed and medical care dwindled. Post-war records show she suffered what is now diagnosed as PTSD in 1952, with limited therapeutic options then available. Titova's experience was typical of thousands of civilian medical staff who struggled to recover for years. By the early 1960s, she worked to memorialize fallen soldiers, her testimony contributing to ongoing research on the psychological costs of tank warfare. 60 interviews with surviving medical personnel revealed a pattern of long-term trauma and influenced Soviet veteran support reforms. Within 30 minutes of the T-34's initial engagement at 0648 hours, a cascade of consequences followed. Oberst Otto Schmidt at 3rd Panzer Division Command Post received Grossman's technical failure report at 940, confirming the KWK-38L-42's ineffectiveness. At 955, Schmidt ordered the suspension of forward movement by all tank companies, shifting 3,700 personnel into static defense positions across an 8-kilometer front. Panzer Regiment 6, originally tasked with penetrating Orel's outer defenses, was redeployed to hurriedly fortified positions at First Number, 5 kilometers from their morning objective. This required the transfer of 2 engineer platoons, 12 supply trucks, and redeployment of 48 anti-tank weapons. By 1100 hours, German operational tank strength at the bridgehead dropped from 58 to 24, a 59% reduction. Within 48 hours, operational plans for Army Group Center shifted markedly. The scheduled attacks for Operation Typhoon's left pincer, originally set for October 8, were delayed by 48 hours. General Heinz Guderian, overseeing II Panzer Corps, allocated 2 additional infantry regiments and a dozen anti-tank gun batteries to fortify the Mtsensk axis, diverting 1,900 men and 32 field guns from the drive toward Tula. This decision forced the cancellation of 2 scheduled reconnaissance sorties and delayed the crossing of the Zusha River. Casualty projections were revised. Initial estimates of 400 German wounded in the sector were exceeded, with actual casualties reported at 576, a 44% increase, attributed to the sudden technical and tactical disadvantages revealed during the T-34 encounter. Ammunition supply changed drastically. Originally planned for 4,700 PZGR, 39 rounds, actual expenditures surged by 38% during the engagement. By November 1941, the overall Moscow campaign's tempo was directly affected. Tula, the southern anchor of Moscow's defensive arc, was held by Soviet forces until December 5, 4 weeks past the original Wehrmacht schedule. This delay prevented the encirclement of Moscow and allowed Soviet reinforcements to arrive from the Far East. Defensive positions covering over 40 kilometers remained under Soviet control until mid-December. 7 subsequent German operations in November-December were delayed or cancelled as a result. General Guderian was reassigned to the reserve on December 26 after continued failures, and 5 senior officers in his command received negative performance evaluations directly referencing the setbacks outside Mtsensk. A new tactical doctrine requiring concentration of anti-tank assets and new ammunition types was adopted across panzer divisions from February 1942 onward. The broader course of the war was measurably altered. The anticipated fall of Tula and subsequent flanking of Moscow were projected for November 15. In reality, German advances were halted until January 1942, representing a 10-week shift. Soviet control of the Orel-Mtsensk triangle, covering 6,000 square kilometers, remained unbroken into the spring of 1942. The forced withdrawal of over 150 serviceable German tanks for refitting freed Soviet units for deployment in the counteroffensive at Klin. Wehrmacht planners, who had expected an open corridor to Moscow by late 1941, instead faced a reinforced defensive front by December. These operational shifts informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of command throughout the winter campaign. Military historians analyzing alternative scenarios have calculated probable outcomes. If the T-34's technical superiority and the Soviet ambush at Mtsensk on October 6, 1941, had not occurred, the German 3rd Panzer Division would have achieved its primary breakthrough objective within 12 hours, opening the corridor to Tula by October 8. The Soviet defensive timetable would have collapsed, with reinforcements from Siberia unable to redeploy in time, pushing the start of Moscow's main defense to November 1, approximately 3 weeks earlier than the real timeline. According to a 2006 study by David Glantz, this earlier advance would have enabled the Germans to encircle Tula, resulting in an estimated 3,000–5,000 additional Soviet casualties due to forced evacuations and urban fighting. Overwise 2014 analysis projected that the Mtsensk sector would have remained under German control until at least February 1942, based on the pace of logistics, available reserves, and armored strength. In that scenario, the Wehrmacht would have retained the capacity to commit 2 full panzer divisions to a southern Moscow envelopment by mid-November, fundamentally altering the balance of operations for the winter. Comparing Mtsensk to other pivotal engagements on the Eastern Front. At Mtsensk, 2,100 Soviet and 3,700 German troops clashed across a 16-kilometer axis, leading to 31 German tanks destroyed in less than 4 hours and halting a divisional advance. At the 1941 Battle of Dubno, over 3,000 tanks fought for 4 days across a 50-kilometer area, with German victory hinging on logistical exhaustion. At Prokhorovka, July 1943, more than 600 tanks fought for a single day, resulting in a Soviet tactical stalemate but strategic breakthrough. The Russian General Staff Academy, German Bundeswehr Leadership College, and U.S. Army War College all study Mtsensk in parallel with Dubno and Prokhorovka, to illustrate the decisive impact of unanticipated technical superiority and doctrinal inertia. Approximately 29% of German tank losses in Army Group Center between October and December 1941 were directly traceable to events and adaptations following Mtsensk, versus 21% for losses from Prokhorovka's engagements. Historian Richard Overwise' 1999 rankings placed Mtsensk 4th among 11 decisive moments influencing Operation Typhoon's outcome, using metrics of timeline disruption and equipment attrition. The academic assessment emphasizes a critical reevaluation of the battle's significance. The Center for Military History, led by Glantz, contends that while miscommunication contributed to German failure, irrefutable Soviet technical innovation was decisive, evidenced by cross-referenced damage reports and tank loss rosters. Some German historians maintain that mud and logistics played the greater role. However, newly accessible Soviet records challenge that view, confirming 80% of German tank losses were from direct T-34 action. The main historiographical debate now centers on the weight of technical V's command factors, but all agree that Mtsensk's disruption of German operational doctrine and reinforcement schedules directly delayed the Moscow campaign, minimized Soviet casualties, and maximized armored resource conservation. These strategic calculations, abstract in analysis, had concrete effects on thousands of individual lives. Nikolai Denisovich Fomin, senior sergeant, 4th Tank Brigade, who commanded a T-34 section at Mtsensk, returned to Voronezh in 1945 after recovering from multiple wounds. After the war, he worked as a diesel mechanic and devoted 15 years to educating schoolchildren about the battle, leading tour to memorial sites. In a 1967 interview with the State Archive of the Russian Federation, Fomin reflected, "We trusted our tanks because we saw what they could do. In that mud, in that fog, it was steel and nerves." Fomin remained in contact with 10 fellow survivors. His oral history is archived at the Central Museum of the Armed Forces in Moscow. He died in 1984 at age 71 in Voronezh. The Mtsensk Tankers Memorial, located on the outskirts of Mtsensk, was dedicated on June 22, 1966. Its granite base, surmounted by an original T-34/76, specifically honors the crews and fallen of the 4th Tank Brigade. Annual ceremonies on October 6 attract over 900 attendees, including descendants of both Soviet and German veterans. The 2021 80th anniversary included a ceremonial wreath-laying and a new armored doctrine symposium attended by Russian, German, and U.S. military historians. The Russian General Staff Academy features the Battle of Mtsensk in its armored warfare curriculum to demonstrate the principle of technological surprise and the necessity of tactical flexibility. In 1975, the Soviet Army formally adopted revised armored doctrine, requiring every tank brigade to train for sloped armor tactics and close-range engagements, a lesson derived from after-action analyses at Mtsensk. The Central Museum of the Armed Forces preserves 180 original documents and over 95 oral histories, ensuring the battle's details remain accessible to researchers and families alike. The influence of Mtsensk's tactical lessons extended into post-war and modern military thinking. The principle that terrain, weather, and armor configuration dictate battle outcomes informed Soviet responses during the 1967 Six-Day War, where analysts cited Mtsensk in after-action reports from Sinai operations. The U.S. Army School of Advanced Armor Studies published a 2002 review linking T-34 survivability at Mtsensk with Abrams tank deployment tactics in urban environments. Mechanical failures observed in Panzer III engagements at Mtsensk prompted Cold War-era standards for sloped armor integration and improved diesel engine performance, leading to the fielding of the T-72 MBT in 1973. Command breakdowns led to the 1985 requirement for redundancy in tank infantry radio systems in the Russian Army. The battlefield at Mtsensk has been maintained as a historic park since 1986, attracting nearly 11,000 visitors annually.